House of the Dragon. At least it's better than Season 8 of Game of Thrones. And Episode 2 is maybe, tentatively, better than Episode 1. I'm not sure it's ever going to reach the heights that Game of Thrones did, but at least it's heading in the right direction. The apparent box ticking from Episode 1 seems to have abated. Maybe it was an attempt to appease people after the poor reception to Season 8. But in Episode 2 the writers start really getting into telling their own story. The episode starts off with a reworked version of the Game of Thrones intro, and I quite like it. We open on a beach, with men staked to the ground, with crabs eating them alive. It appears Steve Toussaint, playing Corlys Velaryon, was right in the last episode. Imagine my shock. It's not great when Hollywood writing has become so hackneyed and predictable that you can foresee a character's actions from their skin colour and gender. I knew this was where the show was going, at least I didn't have to wait for very long. The king says he has plans set in motion to handle the pirates, and the princess gets sent away for suggesting they take dragons to kill them. 6 months have passed between episodes 1 and 2. Daemon took his Gold Cloak army and took control of the island of Dragonstone. He is refusing to accept being disinherited as heir to the throne. The princess has to choose a new member of the King's Guard, and chooses Sir Christian Cole, the man who beat Daemon in the tournament in episode 1. As she wants a knight with actual battle experience, but she betrays a lack of political nous that may well land her in trouble by snubbing the knights with famous names. Alicent Hightower is still being sent by her father to visit and try and seduce the king. She does not seem very happy about it. Alicent also spends time with the princess, consoling her about the death of her mother. The princess still seems to be in love with Alicent, though it looks like her feelings may be unrequited. The actress playing Alicent puts in another solid performance. The king meets with the Velaryons and they suggest he marry their 12-year-old daughter to stave off the threat of civil war and unite their houses. In the next scene the king is having his finger treated. It's black and necrotic. It appears to be the finger he cut on the Iron Throne in episode 1. So it may be that someone is trying to poison him by applying poison to the spikes of the Iron Throne and waiting for him to cut himself. There's a meeting of the council regarding Daemon. He appears to have stolen one of the king's dragon eggs, and at the same time declaring that he has taken another wife and she's pregnant with his child. This spurs the king into action, as the egg had been a gift to his dead infant son. Otto Hightower goes to confront Daemon on Dragonstone to try and get the egg back. As things look like they're going to become violent, the princess surprisingly arrives on a dragon and confronts her uncle, in what is, admittedly, quite an impressively cinematic scene. Daemon chooses not to kill her, and instead gives the egg back. The king seeks advice, and he's told to marry the 12-year-old Velaryon girl, as her family owns half the fleet. Even though he's a Targaryen, he balks at the idea of marrying a 12-year-old girl. Maybe it's because she isn't a close enough relation. There's a meeting of the council, and the king declares to everyone that he will take a new wife. And he declares to everyone's surprise that it will be Alicent Hightower. Corlys Velaryon storms off, as well as the king's daughter, who's probably still in love with Alicent. Corlys, seeing this as a betrayal, meets with Daemon and suggests an alliance against the king and the pirates that have been attacking his ships. And that's it for episode 2. No sex scenes, not much violence, and the show on this occasion was probably better off for it. In Game of Thrones, when it was there, it was mostly there for a reason, and it should be the same here. It shouldn't ever be gratuitous. I've been thinking more about my review for episode 1, in particular the apparent suicidal tendencies of the Targaryens, Daemon with his open face helmet, the princess riding the dragon, the king's dangerous throne room. The question that I was left with was, is this an intentional theme from the writers? Have the writers done something clever that I'm not giving them full credit for? And I'm still not sure. Have they portrayed Daemon as someone reckless enough to go into a joust with a fully open face helmet? Possibly yes. How about being arrogant enough, prematurely celebrating, turning his back on an opponent and getting maced in the spine? Possibly yes. Is the princess carefree enough to ride a dragon? Possibly yes. That's not too far of a stretch. The problem with this theory is King Viserys. Why is he fine with having his daughter, an only child, taking such reckless risks? He's lost multiple babies with his wife through failed pregnancies or infant mortality, and yet he finds his only child has been riding a dragon in episode 1 and he laughs. Why is he fine with the dangerous throne room and the throne that gouges a piece of his flesh out every time he sits on it? Does the king not have access to someone with a file that can remove the points? Why is he not suspicious that he might be being poisoned? I voiced the opinion that episode 1 smacked of a box-ticking exercise, like the writers had made a list of things people liked from Game of Thrones and tried to put all of those things into House of the Dragon as a way to try and appease people for the bad feeling of Season 8. Why is the king having fights to the death in his tourney? I think the writers wanted a tourney in House of the Dragon because it was a thing they did in Game of Thrones, but when a fight to the death broke out in Game of Thrones, King Robert famously said,
"Stop this madness in the name of your king!"
The person in Game of Thrones that allowed fights to death was King Joffrey, which was understandable because he was portrayed as a sadistic psychopath. It made sense when he did it. In contrast, King Viserys is neither of those things, so a fight to the death is not only not in his established character, but the opposite of it. The deaths of the sons of noble houses alienates the king from his supporters. The characterisation of King Viserys is all over the place. His actions frequently the opposite of his established core motivations, and Paddy Considine struggled to be convincing quite a lot in episode 2. So, what was the verdict on House of the Dragon? It was okay, and it's moving in the right direction.